please, to give us an update on COVID-19 related activities.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Okay. Well, COVID-19 has subsumed most of our efforts in the last month. I'll hit the highlights. Part of it's a review, part of it's new. As the board's aware, we split our staff into 3 groups. One continued to work in routine fashion. That's a small number, essentially senior leadership. That's about 20 of our 322 employees. 140 are on telework. Have been issued laptops. We had to buy some laptops. Our IT section has been wonderful. They do all business by conference call, WebEx, and distributed staff work. Essentially all community development, all of rental assistance, a big piece of affordable housing, urban development, and our supporting staff is on telework. And then within the affordable housing group, roughly about 120 people are on what we call the team approach, where half come in Monday through Saturday of one week and then take the following week of the 80 hours and they stay at home. And the second half come in and run the properties in the second half of the week. That is going very well for us. Our continuity of operations plan is successful. I give us a solid B plus on it, A minus. We've had some growing pains, significant growing pains, but we're keeping all the balls in the air and it's going well. Our biggest business item under COVID is recertification. We are seeing very large numbers of people who had work and were in relatively low paying jobs that have lost their jobs and are going to minimum rents. So both Norman's office and rental assistance for vouchers, easily 800 to 1,000 clients have come in for recertification. I think our most precise number about a week ago was 718. It's growing. And in affordable housing, our leasing assistants and property managers are very busy doing recertifications as people have lost income and go to minimum rents. And not to patronize the board, I think you're aware that if you're below the poverty line at a certain level, you pay a minimum rent of $25 and the federal government pays the rest. But we have to recertify the income. We have to file back with the Fed.
Is there a glitch?
There's no glitches. It's just a process. I mean, recertification easily per client's a 4 to 6 hour process because they have to demonstrate materially they've actually lost the income. Okay, we're not allowed by the federal government just to say, okay, we have to research it, we have to validate it, and that means the client has to bring in things. We now make them screen it into an electronic scanning machine, and they send it over to the leasing assistant, who then receives it at home and does the certification work. So it's going forward. There is some friction, frankly, Paulette, but it's going well, and we're not holding up anything for our clients. Our add-on since our last discussion, we've gone significantly into the testing world, and I want to publicly thank Councilmember Sharon Hurt and former Councilmember Jerry Maynard for being superb in helping us coordinate this with Nashville General, and a big shout out to Joe Webb and Dr. Hall. We started now a month ago testing at our towers. Now we can offer tests, we can't require tests. So we're running about 40% roughly of our residents are accepting the offer. Our positives have been extraordinarily low. We were up to, I think, 5 now, positives across all the towers. Our last set of tower tests come Friday, Saturday at Parthenon and Carleen Waller, Friday, Saturday. So Fridays and Saturdays for the past month have been testing days. We will continue to test, and we're about to take a dramatic expansion in our testing capacity in partnership with the state of Tennessee and the National Guard. And next week, we will have 100% testing of all employees over a 5-day period, and HR is coordinating that. So we'll start with me and work our way all the way through the organization. Everyone will get tested. Is a requirement for I'm making that a requirement of our employees to get tested. And then for all of our residents, we will offer testing at all the sites on a schedule in conjunction with the National Guard. And I want to commend the state task force who've been directly liaison work with Buck and Will Biggs and the rest of our team to make this happen. So our robust testing program will continue. So we won't just test once, we'll circle back and continue reliable, repetitive, continuous testing offered to the residents, and on a less frequent basis, a required testing for employees. We are also working with Ascension Health to import a screening application to the phones of all our employees, where they will soon, I think soon being within the next 2 weeks, this is the application required of all physicians, nurses, and care providers in the Ascension Health System. They will log in, they'll have to take their temperature, they'll answer a series of questions on the application. That application will register them as being present at work. And if in the questions they answer, the logarithm determines they need to speak to a physician, it will send them by telemedicine to a physician who then will determine if they need to take a test. Within those, our Safe at Home Continuity of Operations program is doing everything we can think of for the health and safety of our residents and the health and safety of our employees. Our additional 2 recent items, we had the opportunity under the CARES Act to relinquish the constraints on the retirement accounts for our employees, for anyone that wanted to draw their retired pay down. But the language in that CARES Act was as if someone had lost their income and was unable to make payments or make their bills. Well, no one's lost, everybody's on full paying allowances. No one's lost anything. But recognizing we may have someone with spouses or other significant others in their family, we have created the employee loan program. We have a standing committee and an application. We've only had 3 employees apply, but we will provide low interest loans, forgivable low interest loans to any employee that has had a change in economic condition due to a spouse losing work or others. We think that meets the intent of the CARES Act without getting into somewhat of a gray area on releasing retirement funds. And our last opportunity that we're working closely now, which is an exciting one, I'm happy to share with the board that we are coordinating directly with Dr. Glover at Tennessee State and Mr. Jamie Isabel, who are representing the Oprah Winfrey Foundation. And the Oprah Winfrey Foundation will donate roughly $600,000 and $200 Kroger gift cards to those of our residents who've been impacted by the economic conditions of the COVID virus. They were very specific that they didn't want to make it for all residents. So, for example, our tower residents, who are all generally elderly, generally on Social Security, and have fixed incomes, they've not been impacted in a negative way by the COVID virus economically. So we've gone through and scrubbed our rosters, and we have 720 roughly residents in the voucher program, and we have 2,495 in our apartments whose names we have given to Dr. Glover and Mr. Isabel, and they will be receiving $200 gift cards in the next week from Ms. Winfrey. So for the public record and for the board, I just want to thank Ms. Winfrey. This act of generosity is it's just sort of overwhelming to me that someone cared enough to come from the outside and make this wonderful gesture to our residents. So that's really a summary. Everything we can think of with staff and in coordination with the community. We continue to have Zach Blair and Christine Lalonde as our direct representatives to Metro government. They sit in on the Emergency Operations Center briefings. They're present either telephonically or electronically or physically for the mayor's briefings. We remain directly aligned with Dr. Janagir and Metro Public Health Director. So I think we've done everything we can, but it has taken a lot of time and effort, and I'm not apologizing for that, but it's meant that certain things that we were looking at with the board and others to try to move forward on a discussion. We've had the discussion with you. We've had to push a little bit to the back burner to address these operational issues. So that's really the summary. Continuity of operations continues. Testing has started and will expand. We've instituted a program to take care of the economic health for any employee that may have a spouse impacted by the virus economic conditions. And Ms. Winfrey has reached out and made an extraordinarily generous offer that we've taken up and are coordinating a donation of $200 gift cards. Pretty quick summary, but I think I did in about 15 minutes, and subject to your questions for the board chair or the commissioners. That's my report on the COVID update.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You cut off when you were talking about there were 800 to 1,000 who are seeking recertification, and I didn't hear the rest of that. And what is the minimum rent?
Minimum rent's $25. And we have, I can get those stats. We have a large number of our families on minimum rents. and a large number, and that number is increased. But my point on that is our normal recert in a month might be 100, might be on a heavy month, and we're at a much higher volume, which is taking up staff, and we're doing it in this distributed manner where we're not actually able to sit down with someone face to face and go, oh, you're missing your letter from your employer, or you're missing your Social Security documents, and hold that face to face meeting, which does slow the process down a little bit. But we're doing, our staff's doing tremendous at it. It's just a new environment for us. Does that answer your question, Paulette?
Yes.
Thank you, Jim. I would just like to acknowledge that Commissioner Campbell has joined us. It's good to see you. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. We can hear you too. So if you have any questions, just remember to mute and unmute yourself.
Okay.
Welcome. And I hope you're doing okay. How are you?
I'm doing good. The last meeting I had a appointment with my device doctor. Is checking my box and make sure I still got some battery usage in it and everything. So everything looks good.
Great.
That's good to hear, Commissioner Campbell. Thank you.
Excuse me, Emily, there's feedback or some reverberation. Can you do anything? Because everybody else is very clear and there's something with your sound, your audio.
Is that happening for others as well?
There's a slight echo. I think it's just the room you're in, it's my guess.
I think that sometimes it's helpful if we try to just mute and unmute so we don't have multiple speakers unmuted. That sometimes can help. But Paulette, let me know if it continues to be an issue and I can call in. Jim, I had a couple questions for you. So I know that obviously we're just seeing lots of federal resources from HUD that are starting to flow down, and lots of different to various programs, and you all are trying to be nimble and quick and adjust to that. But so can you give us a relative understanding of are the resources that are starting to come out and roll out to us from HUD sufficient for what your increased load of work has been and for what the residents need?
It's a good question. I would say cautiously yes, although the largest work is in rental assistance. We do have access to an 881,000 that was deposited yesterday in our accounts from HUD for administrative purposes. It does have a lot of strings on it. So our intent is to document and ask for everything we can under the existing regulations, and then we'll identify the balance. So we guess there's somewhere between 400 and 450,000 that will go that we can justify to the existing notices. And that's a soft figure right now. We're refining that. And then the balance, we're going to come up with the other expenses, and I'm going for a waiver right to the secretary. So we're going to expend all those funds, and those administrative funds are the largest direct infusion to MDHA. In our voucher program at mid-year, we're essentially balanced. We're at 242,000 to the good on the balance between the number of vouchers in play and the budget authority. So that's about as tight as you can run it and stay positive. We have project-based vouchers coming online, and we are right now not issuing vouchers. We got about 200 in play on the street to be leased up. So cautiously, we're in good shape. The other resources that are in play are largely community development resources and emergency solution grants, community development block grants. We are in direct coordination daily on the use of those funds. Buck went Monday, and this is not ready for prime time to give a full brief to anyone, but the Metro is interested in us for the homeless population in purchasing a former nursing home. We're doing an engineering study now to see whether the price asked and the amount of work required, if we can make that work. We have determined we have funds eligible that can be applied that are from the CARES Act grant. They would not be funds that we have dedicated to other development. But we don't yet know if that's a prudent use. I only offer that as an example. That's one of about 5 things we're working on with Metro right now to determine feasibility and do comparative analysis on cost benefit on how best to use the funds. But I'd say cautiously, yes, it is a roller coaster ride. There has not been but for the board, there's not been a large tranche of big funds come to us. Significant increases in the overall revenues. That has not occurred, and hopefully it will, but it is not yet. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was very helpful. I'm sure that you've been tracking that this week an emergency rental assistance bill for $100 billion is going to be introduced. And I think that it's up to about 100 co-sponsors, but the implications for us would be absolutely huge in terms of needing to roll out those funds for emergency rental assistance far beyond our residents. And so I was just curious to hear your thoughts as well.
Well, we hope it passes. In terms of the financial management of the program, as I think the board appreciates, if the resident is paying, say, $300 and the federal stipend's another $700 for a $1,000 voucher, these are all made up numbers. And then the resident goes to $25 because they've lost their income. Now the federal government pays more, but we don't get more from our budget authority at MDHA. Those funds are not there yet. That's what that bill would do. And we're projecting right now that we will go negative this year, and we will tap into a very small amount of HUD-held reserves for the program and still be tracking negative. We have a thing called the 2-year tool that Norman works essentially daily to track this. That's why we're not issuing new vouchers right now, because we're anticipating with the increased funds required to source the decrease in tenant paid portion of the voucher, that increase, plus what we have on the street, plus the project-based vouchers that are coming online. And it's mainly that decrease in tenant paid rent that we're having to focus on. And it's going to drive us, projected now to drive us negative. And it will probably exceed the HUD Hill reserves, and we'll ask for more. But you can't do that until you're actually negative. You can only do it in projection, and we're making those alerts to rental assistance, to our HUD counterparts and rental assistance. And they're saying the same thing. They hope the bill passes, and that's where those funds will come from. So we do hope it passes. If it does, we're certainly going to go after those funds. And we're going to go after the funds regardless. I don't think in the history of our program here, we've ever taken money out of our operational funds from other programs and fed rental assistance. We certainly don't intend to do so this year. In talking with Denise Cleveland-Liggett, the regional administrator, she says the Secretary's intent is not for agencies to have to do that, as long as we manage the program and we can prudently demonstrate that when we knew we had these additional recertifications coming in, that we took prudent steps and didn't just continue to run it into the red, that we can count on support from them for reimbursement. So again, I'm cautiously optimistic that whatever shortfall comes as we close out the year in August, September, that we're going to be okay. A great question. Thank you.
Emily.
Yes, Kay, go ahead.
Yes. I rarely use WebEx, so I'm just stumbling around over here. Feel like in the dark. But on the CDBG monies for rental assistance, looking at the Nashville community as a whole, about 27% of calls coming into 211 are from people needing help with housing and rental assistance. So there are folks looking at, could those, I know that that's an eligible use with the CDBG monies, both on the tornado disaster side relief and the COVID side. But it sounds like, from what I'm hearing from Jim, and correct me if I'm wrong, that those are going to be looked at as a source for monies to help on MDHA's tenant side. Am I right on that or not?
No, I apologize if I wasn't clear. So color and flavor money and the lanes of finance. Community development block grants is our standard program, and you were briefed on it at the last committee meeting. Our standard action plan and the consolidated plan continue. There's no change in the standard program. The CDB CARES monies We have not allocated them to anything yet. And we are in almost daily meetings with the mayor's office on their intent. And those funds, thus far, to my knowledge, has not been any discussion on using any of those to backstop rental assistance housing choice vouchers. And I'm not sure that's even legal because those are separate federal appropriations. So the one appropriation for rental assistance, which falls under the public and Indian housing lane of the appropriations in Congress, and the other lane, community development block grants, falls under a different lane called community program development. So they're different federal appropriations. I don't anticipate taking CDBG CARES money and backstopping, if you will, an increase in need for federal subsidy to maintain the current voucher inventory. I do anticipate, and what Emily was discussing, is there is a bill to add more money into the rental assistance voucher program in that federal appropriation, whose intent is to pick up the extra costs that occur when people who are working of low income lose their jobs and go to minimum rents, as we described here. And then the federal government has to pick up the additional amount of money to the fair market rent. Those funds, that bill, to my knowledge, has not passed. FADA, on our behalf, who's basically our lobbyist up there, is tracking it. Should it pass, that will be a lot of help to HUD. But regardless, we're in direct communication with HUD on the impact we have of the recertifications. We have already registered a request against HUD-held reserves for our program, and our estimate is they will probably be insufficient should the year continue. And HUD knows that, and HUD has said to us that as long as we don't issue more vouchers and we just stay with what we've got and don't go crazy and start leasing up more people, then they will make good any shortfall. And that's all verbal. But in the history of the program, when we have been short in the past, HUD has made up that shortfall. But we've never had a shortfall of more like a 1% or a 2%, and that has come from HUD-held reserves. So separate appropriations. And then the third appropriation is emergency solution grants, ESG. And the ESG funds are for homeless. It is those funds that I was discussing on options we're looking at with the city of possibly buying a site for permanent supportive housing for homeless. And I only offered that as one option among, I think, at least 4 or 5 that are being discussed. And I just offered that as the active work we're doing with the city to determine their intended choices, and we'll follow their lead on what their choices are. So separate lanes, traditional CDBG, we have those funds continue, stay with the program. CDBG CARES to be determined, but we're in close coordination with Metro on how they want the funds spent. Amel's working that daily, along with Christina Lalonde and others, Matt and others making that coordination. Emergency solution grants, we've got a little bit more traction and fidelity out of Metro, what they may want to do in the form of this nursing home potential purchase. And then on the rental assistance, a separate federal lane of federal appropriations that we believe we're going to run into shortfall by the end of the year. We've alerted HUD, they're aware of it, and we believe they'll make us whole in any shortfall. And these funds are not statistically huge, and we're talking a 2 or 3% shortfall in the year. So did that clear it up? I know it's a lot of words and hard to do this over the computer, but did that answer your question?
It's clearer than it was before. It's clear. So if I could just go back to the CDBG CARES portion of these monies that Christine and Matt are working with Metro on, that's the same answer that was given when we last met. So what's the status? What's the timeline? What else can you share other than that same answer? And you may not can, but people are asking me because I'm still involved in a lot in this rental housing assistance help. So I'd like to be able to give some clear answers.
So Mel, if you could just give an update of what your conversations with HUD. So there's several parts of this, but essentially it's a 3-legged stool. You've got MDHA as the administrator, you've got HUD as the funder for CDBG CARES, and you've got Metro, who actually is the one that receives the funds and we administer them on their behalf. So we look to Metro for the intent, but I can guarantee you we're going to make sure the funds are fully expended. We're not going to lose any budget authority, but And Mel, are you on? If you could add some clarity on where you stand, because I know this is something you deal with daily. Could you maybe give us an update?
Sure, I'll give an update on the HUD part, and maybe Matt can update on where the city is in terms of developing the final action plan. HUD has notified us that we should amend our 2019 action plan to account for CARES Act funds. We have begun that process by issuing out a community input survey to kind of get a list of community needs so that we're prepared and ready to go to submit an action plan to HUD once we are clear on the intended use of those funds for Metro.
And Mel, HUD has not put out a notice on this yet. That's part of our delay. Is that correct? We don't have I haven't seen the notice. I might have missed it, but we haven't seen a notice this month. Is that correct?
So we expect guidance from HUD any day now. We got an email from them this week sort of saying that they're finalizing guidance, and we should have more additional information coming out real soon.
So, okay, part of the challenge is HUD hasn't told us the process even to expend the funds, but we're talking to them. We got verbals, but we're a little hesitant to make and you know, I don't mind taking a little risk, but I don't want to spend money and have them turn around and say you made a mistake and you got to pay us back, right? So we're waiting on that specific guidance. And I know Mel, because I bug him, he's calling him like every day, sometimes a couple times a day. So that's in the HUD piece. Either Christine or Matt, can you update where we are with Metro?
Christine, you're on mute.
We've had frequent. Hi, can you hear me?
So, yeah, Matt, you want to go first?
Hello.
Go ahead, Matt.
Sorry. So we've had frequent conversations with Metro on sort of the ways that they would like to see the funding expended. That fits into the overall disbursement of funds. Metro doesn't get to dictate that. That's what Amel and his team determine, but obviously we want to reflect the priorities of the administration as we're dispersing the funds. And so we've been having conversations with them and actually have a call with them later this afternoon in which we hope to finalize any guidance from them. They have been trying to balance a variety of considerations, including sort of the overall budget and quite honestly, some nonprofits who will not be receiving funding through the Metro budget, trying to make up for that by making sure that there's CARES Act funding available to them through ESG or CDBG. But we're making sure that we don't delay the process. And so sort of at this point, as Amel mentioned, the governing item has really been the direction from HUD. We just want to make sure that we're prepared to move forward. So he's done the community survey. We're getting input from the mayor's office. And then as soon as we get the release from HUD, we'll move forward with the overall plan.
So Matt, has a timeline been set?
There isn't a specific timeline, again, because we aren't able to determine the HUD action. Presuming that we get the guidance from HUD later this week, as Amel referenced, maybe Amel, could you walk through what the next steps would be from there to disbursement of funds?
Sure. Once we receive clearance on what Metro, their intended use of the funds, we just have to submit an amendment to the 2019 action plan. That amendment will go out for 5 days for public comment and review. Following that, it will go before MDHA's board of directors and then on to the Metro Council, and then we'll submit it on to HUD. We've gotten feedback that process will be a quick turnaround process, not the lengthy process that goes into our standard action plan, which is about 45 days. Once the plan is approved by HUD, we should receive grant agreements, and they'll set up those eligible activities in IDIS, and that's when we can actually begin to draw down those funds. Our guidance from HUD Knoxville is that we cannot expend any of those funds until we have those final grant agreements.
Okay.
Can I address a couple things too? Okay, so a few things. First of all, one of our goals has been that we are completely ready for when this guidance comes out, that we have options ready to go so that we can deploy as quickly as possible, so that none of any delay is not on our end. It's just us being ready for whatever the next step is. And that's been a big part of what we're doing. Actively engaged with the community on things like the 211 data that you mentioned. Also, the community surveys, multiple community surveys and conversations with people on the ground, particularly on the ESG funds, which are directed to homelessness, and really trying to get a triage system where we're looking at, pandemic mitigation, things like sheltering and healthcare access and testing, appropriate responses there. Basic needs, meeting basic needs. We're doing a lot more encampment outreach than we've ever done as a community because of the pandemic. And so those are another thing that we're looking at. And also coordinating with philanthropic support, making sure that we're not duplicating efforts, that we're really coordinating. And then looking at the different streams of money that come in beyond ESG and CDBG. So FEMA funds, for example. So FEMA funds are more for the response aspect, for the sheltering aspect. So, for example, extra emergency hiring is happening at the fairgrounds shelter. That's out of FEMA money, not out of ESG or CDBG, and making sure that those things are covered. So there's a lot of coordination, and some of the clarity coming forward is not great, and that's just from the feds, right? So who gets what? So, and also supporting nonprofits as they look for reimbursement opportunities from FEMA. So, for example, folks that are putting people in hotels who are medically fragile or particularly vulnerable, they can have an opportunity to have 75% reimbursement as nonprofits in that space. And so we're really looking to maximize every dollar, philanthropic, FEMA, also the big Treasury allotment, which is 119 million. That's coming to Nashville locally, making sure that if there's particular needs that are addressed by that fund rather than our ESG and CDBG funds, that the money comes from there. So really trying to maximize every pool of money to help the most vulnerable people with their needs in this moment. So, and lots of active conversation with those folks on the front lines as well.
I guess you'll have a really nice infographic once you have all these pieces in place, Christine.
Yeah, that's the hope. That's the hope.
So a lot of it sounds like the chicken or the egg, just to put it in simple terms to me. And, I'm just trying to give people an idea and give accurate information because people are going to be losing housing. So we're just going to add to the problem, hence my sense of urgency. And I'll leave it at that and ask the question again next time we gather together.
And we look forward to it. I think the simplest answer is HUD has not issued the instructions on how we tap into the funds. Yeah. That's the simplest. And we can't expend these funds until we're allowed to do so. It's just straight up federal compliance. In HUD, to get a notice out in their standard, they have a thing called the Staff Action Guide. They budget 180 days to get a notice. And they're going to beat that by some number, but we don't know what it is. And for every week that I call, it's next week, right? So we got to wait on that. In the meantime, we're doing everything we can to be ready that when it comes out, we can move quickly. They have described the process and they have abbreviated the process. The 5-day review that Amel alluded to is usually 30 or 60. I can't remember which, but it's certainly shorter. So we'll move as quick as we can, but we can't do anything until HUD issues the guidance on how for us to tap in and expend the funds.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, and in the interest of time, I think that I just want to touch base on the budget because on the agenda. I realize that we have a guest, Carol Naughton, coming to join us, I believe, in about 5 minutes. Is that right, Jim?
She's joining at 9:30 for us, so we've got till 9:30. But you're correct. At any point when she joins, I'd agreed with her that she will then defer to her presentation. And as in our previous discussions, my belief is what we have is a list of items that we may not get through here, and wherever we stop on today's agenda, we just pick up on Tuesday.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was okay and there wasn't anything we needed to ensure we got to. I think obviously the crisis is at the top of everyone's mind. So Paulette, I do believe that you had another question you wanted to ask. And I also just want to acknowledge before that Commissioner Batts has joined us. So we have all commissioners here today on the call. Antoinette, I hope you're well.
Good morning to all. Yes, I'm well. But I have a question also about renters when Ms. Paulette gets finished, okay?
Okay,
Miss Fowler. Okay, I'm gonna mute back.
okay.
My question was a little bit clarification of what the community outreach and the community surveys were. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it.
Mel, could you cover that, please?
Sure. We developed a survey based upon what we know will be eligible activities. HUD released sort of some guidelines on what could be eligible activities for the CDBG CV funds. So we sent that out to community stakeholders to get their responses on what they considered the needs were.
Okay.
In addition, go ahead.
That's what I'm asking. Who were the samples of the stakeholders? Because there seems to be a disconnect between people who are on the front line and the people from whom we're getting information.
We sent it out to a list of over 800 stakeholders. Can you provide more information on the disconnect, and maybe we could?
That's what I'm perceiving based on Kay's questions and what we're doing. So it's a question of how I'm understanding. So it's okay. You said 800, so that's pretty comprehensive. I don't know who they are, and we don't have time to do that. So I have a better sense. It wasn't 10 people.
No, not at all. We also surveyed our cornerstone members.
Excuse me, how many of the 800 responded?
74 responded.
Thank you. I'm done.
Commissioner Betts?
Okay, this is a question for Mr. Harbison. I might be backtracking, but I need to ask this question. For the renters in housing that has been put on furlough and they get unemployment, and sometimes their unemployment, is more than they're making on their job. When things open back up, will they be put on retro, or what does the individuals need to do if they're not having face-to-face recertifications?
Well, we're doing recertifications. I'll let Will address that, but it's pretty straightforward policy that we have to follow. It's going to be a series of recertifications. So there are those unusual conditions where people are getting more unemployment than they were receiving when they were employed. And those, as I understand it, I don't have any statistics on it because I did, but I asked the question. That's somewhat rare in our population right now. But for those they actually have to pay a little bit more in rent. And then when they go back to the unemployment ends and they return to employment, they'll go back to whatever their certified earned income is and their 30% of rent. So, but it does require that coordination between staff, and we are, I think, as we've discussed, the property offices are manned, and we are able to reach out to residents. It is different. And Will, if you're on, could you maybe talk a little bit what we're doing on the frontline property staffs under the team approach that you kind of pioneered?
About recertifications and unemployment, is that where we are?
I think the question is, one, what is access to the property staff for recertification? And then two, just in general, how our continuity of operations program is going with property management and its relations with the residents.
Okay. So continuity of operations, I think, are going well, considering we're staffing at minimum levels at this point. We do still have every office is open 5-6 days a week in most cases. We're not doing face-to-face in-person contact with residents, but we're doing everything we can to, and let me not say we are minimizing face-to-face contact. We are still doing some face-to-face contacts because we're still leasing up several properties, and you cannot do that without ever having a face-to-face interaction with the client. And so we are still doing some face-to-face, but we're minimizing those. We're still accessible, like Mr. Harbison mentioned. We're using electronic format as much as we can. We're also using drop boxes. We're using the mail. We're using all resources that we have at our disposal to try and minimize those contacts. But the business necessity requires that we do have some In terms of, there was some discussion about the unemployment changes. So our certification processes are not changing anything from what it has been in the past. If somebody has a change in employment that's more than $200 in a month, they've got to report that. In this case, if it's unemployment, we'll annualize that amount of income that they get, and their payment will be adjusted up or down depending on what the circumstances are. And then if that unemployment ceases and they have either no income or another source, then they come in and report that, and we adjust the payment again, up or down depending on what the circumstances are. So we're trying to continue operations as normally as we possibly can, but to do so in the safest way possible.
Thank you. That answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoinette. Jim, my final question that I had was, were housing authorities eligible for PPP, and did we apply? Sorry, the Payment Protection Program?
I'll have to take that for the record. I actually don't know for sure. I just don't know. That's a great question. Let me take that for the record. So I think we're chasing every pot of money we can think of, and we've got FEMA, TEMA, insurance, COVID, others. But let me take that for the record and get back to you. I just don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
Okay, do we have other questions related to what we're doing in response to COVID? Okay, hearing none, Jim, I just want to thank you and the whole team for everything you're doing. I think you're being incredibly nimble and responsive in this crisis. And to Kay's questions and Paulette's questions, anything that Christine and Matt and others can share with the board so that we're all speaking in one united voice to the community who's asking questions related to our response with CDBG and ESG funds, please share that when you can. So if we move on now, I think we can get started in our annual legal review before our guest comes.
So Will, Chopin, and Saul, would you take the lead on this one? And you should have received a board packet with a spreadsheet that describes it. So Saul?
It's Will.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Mr. Harbison wanted to make sure that the board was provided an annual update on the pending legal matters that we currently have. If you'll allow me to share PowerPoint slide. Okay. Did PowerPoint come up?
Yes.
You can see it.
Thank you very much. Okay, so presently we have 8 lawsuits that are filed that name MDHA or an MDHA affiliate entity as a defendant. And this goes back to the earliest of these was filed January of 2018. That's the one at the top. I'm going to go over these sort of in chronological order from the date of filing. The first one, Vision Real Estate. This is a pretty comprehensive matter. It's alleging state law breach of contract claims, and there were federal equal protection and substantive due process claims alleged against MDHA, and then some additional claims alleged against some council members. As I'll explain in a minute, there have been some successful motions to dismiss filed by MDHA and by other parties.
Say, Will, the slide, at least on my screen, has a big crosshatch box over about a third of it. Is there any way on your end you can remove that, or Robbie or someone to address that? I don't know if the rest of the board's seeing it. And get it to the full screen, and get it to the full screen if that's possible.
Will, I wonder if you put it on just the general presentation without the next slide viewer. We're seeing the next slide viewer.
You're seeing the next slide viewer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. How about this?
It's better for me. There's still some weird boxes showing up, but I don't know if that's something that Will can rectify or not. Is this better for others? Okay, I've seen some heads nod. Will, please continue.
Thank you. Okay, the next couple, Leggett and Legg, those are personal injury cases. Allen it's a jurisdictional challenge to an eviction that took place in 2014. Doss is a personnel matter. Rollins versus Levy, that's the tax credit entity that owns Levy Place Apartments, as a personal injury. Knapp versus Metropolitan Government in Nashville and Davidson County. I briefed the board on this at the board retreat some months ago. It's difficult to summarize, but it arises from an eviction of a resident at Ryman Lofts. And then Fitzpatrick Young is an alleged wrongful death shooting. So what I'd like to do for each of these is provide a brief recitation of the facts as they're alleged in the complaint. Talk about some of the other parties that are involved, the attorneys, and where the cases are pending, and sort of the current status of each of these cases, as well as any additional information that any commissioners might request as we're moving along. Vision Real Estate Investment Corp. And the named plaintiff is a gentleman named Michael Hampton. It's case number 318CV14, filed in the United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee. This was filed January of 2018, so it's a federal court matter. Concerns a few different agreements and a tax increment financing application. So the plaintiff, Mr. Hampton, had a contract and a lease purchase agreement with the Metropolitan Government regarding the acquisition of property adjacent to the Bordeaux Hospital in North Nashville, upon which an assisted living facility sat. Under these agreements with Metro, the plaintiff and his affiliate entities would purchase the land and the facility and take over operations. The plaintiff would also purchase an additional part of Bordeaux property for further developments. So pursuant to the agreements that he had with the Metro government, there was a contractual deadline to pay and to close the transaction, a capital improvements requirement to go into the existing assisted living facility, and a requirement to maintain satisfactory insurance. In connection with all this, the plaintiff submitted an application to MDHA for tax increment financing. The property itself is in the Bordeaux redevelopment district, which was established in 2015. Under the Bordeaux redevelopment plan, the project was not eligible for tax increment financing. And so the complaint goes, the application was correspondingly denied. Mr. Hampton ultimately missed the capital improvements deadline and was held in breach of contract by the Metropolitan Government. This led to a contract modification and Mr. Hampton and MDHA entering into a letter of intent under which Mr. Hampton would agree to sell MDHA parts of the property that he was under contract to purchase from the Metropolitan Government. In December of 2016, you have the two council members, current Vice Mayor Schulman and then council member for District 1, Bordeaux, Leonardo, submitting an ordinance, BL 2016-540. The effect of the ordinance was to rescind the agreements that Metropolitan Government had with the plaintiff on grounds that the facility was not properly being operated and that the insurance requirements he was contractually obligated to meet had not been fulfilled. And furthermore, the purchase deadline, I believe mid-year 2016, had come and gone as well. As a result, the letter of intent that MDHA had with Mr. Hampton was nullified. Mr. Hampton filed suit in January 2018 alleging federal violations of equal protection and due process and several state law breach of contract claims against council members Schulman and Leonardo, the Metropolitan Government, and MDHA. Motions to dismiss were filed by all parties. The council members have been dismissed outright on grounds of legislative immunity. The federal claims have been dismissed against MDHA. MDHA is still in the lawsuit for the state law breach of contract claims. Presently, the Metropolitan Government has a motion to dismiss pending. It has not been decided yet. And the complaint, the damages that were alleged are $20 million in compensatory damages, $60 million in what's called treble damages. Treble means three. There's a state law statute that if you have what's called an inducement by one party to another party to breach a contract that party has, then you have the ordinary damages, and then if you meet the conditions of the statute, you have treble damages. You can triple those. So that explains the 60 million number. And then punitive damages in the amount of 100 million. The legal counsel, which we were provided, we submitted this to Gallagher, who then referred it to the Tennessee Housing Authority Risk Management Trust to provide legal counsel from the law firm of Manier and Herod to MDHA. The principals that are providing litigation defense are Fred Statham, who's a partner, and Carolisa Connell, who is an associate. The plaintiff's counsel is a gentleman named George Fussner in Brentwood. And although it's been pending for 2 years, for over 2 years, there hasn't been a lot of development of the facts or the law in this matter. The motions to dismiss were pending for quite some time, and there's still a motion that's pending. And just with the way things move so slowly in federal courts, there just hasn't been a lot that's happened. Right now, there's a trial date of November 2021. As I'll probably repeat a couple times throughout this presentation, these dates are all subject to change due to COVID-19, because right now there are discovery deadlines that are set forth in a case management plan. So any deadlines that are delayed could lead to an ultimate delay of the trial date. But right now, the case is in discovery. The Metro government is waiting for a determination on its motion to dismiss, and there's a trial date a year and a half from now.
This is Saul. Just to add a little color to this, some of you might know Mike Hampton. Mike has been indicted in state court for a couple of things related to this. One is he's been indicted for stealing money of some of the residents of the assisted living facility that he was operating. So that's the indictment. There's also been an audit done by Metro when he was operating the assisted living facility, and the audit finds somewhere in the neighborhood of $400,000 to $500,000 of money that Metro was giving them to help subsidize the operation. That's unaccounted for. Just from my perspective, you never know what's going to happen in litigation, as we all know, but I don't believe many of these claims, if any, especially the ones against MDHA, have any merit. So it's more a matter of just grinding through the matter. And with Mr. Hampton now being indicted, I don't know what's really going to happen here with this. I guess it's going to continue on, but provide a little bit of color on that. Thank you.
No, thank you, Saul. The next matter is
Sorry, Will, before we continue, I just want to thank you for your presentation so far, but I just want to be mindful that it is 9:30 and I believe we're expecting a guest. Latanya or Jim, do you know if Carol Naughton has joined us?
Right now she hadn't, but we're checking. She had a previous call that she had to finish up, and she was going to join us as soon as that call was over with a target of 9:30. So as soon as we got her on, I'll interrupt and we'll just pause wherever that we are and then move to Carol. Carol, are you on?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay. Then what we will do is we'll hit the pause button on the legal presentation. Thank you, Will and Saul. And if I may, Emily, would you like to introduce Carol, or shall I? I know that you're familiar with her work from your day job. Emily, would you like to introduce her, or shall I?
First, I just want to say, Carol, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like it's kind of like having a rock star and mixing communities and progressive, amazing community development on the call with us today. And so we so appreciate your time. Jim, I can hand the floor over to you to say anything else you'd like to say, but thank you so much for joining.
Well, in the world of affordable housing, especially mixed income remediation and redevelopment of concentrated poverty, anyone that works in that professionally for any period of time knows the name Carol Naughton. She heads a organization called Purpose Built Communities. Their signature project is the East Lake community, which is redevelopment of former public housing that was in extraordinarily poor condition and concentrated poverty and all the negative opportunities that go with those residents that live there. And she was the key operator that glued all of it together, along with a lot of the people, and set up the remediation, redevelopment of that project, that site. We've had the privilege of visiting there, and it has an educational program, a school that is breathtaking in its quality and success. It has an amenity campus headed by the YMCA that provides every service needed. And the low-income residents there have a tremendous life, and all of them move on to great opportunities in there. It is the model for the nation of taking concentrated poverty, remediating it. And I want to thank her. She has been a counselor to me, a mentor. I know that's a term she may not sign up for, but I call her frequently and seek her advice. She last appeared before the board roughly 2.5 years ago, I think, in discussions on what became the Explore School, and went through why the educational piece was so vital to the development. We have applied to be a purpose-built community. We don't quite yet qualify. We are a prospect in their assessment. Primarily, we lack something called the community quarterback, which she's going to touch on, and we're actively seeking someone to start that collaborative champion to help us gain assistance for furthering the Envision Casey development. But everything we've done here in Casey, we have had on purpose-built and done our best to replicate everything that they've done successfully. We have had a few lessons learned from some of the things that you could say maybe with Perfect Vision you might have done slightly different. But you look at Purpose Built and you look at East Lake and go, wow, that's what we want to do here. So Carol, thank you for joining us. And certainly the term rock star in this community is the right word. And I'll leave the floor with you. And I just want to thank you for taking time with us today to educate our board on Purpose Built and how that can apply to what we're doing here in Nashville. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Emily, and thank you, Jim. I'm really happy to be here with you. You are my people. I started my career as a commercial real estate lawyer, was in private practice for 10 years, and then moved to become a lawyer at the Atlanta Housing Authority. And that's where I made that transition from doing just general commercial real estate work to moving more into the community development work and thinking about this. The care and feeding of the Board of Commissioners of the Atlanta Housing Authority was part of my great honor and pleasure when I served as general counsel at AHA. And I appreciate so much the service and how hard it is to be a commissioner at a housing authority. So I want to say I understand your service and I understand the complexities of what you're trying to accomplish and some of the constraints in which you operate, both in terms of the federal constraints as well as the practical and the political constraints. If it's okay, I'm going to try to share a deck with you. I've not used WebEx very often, so I've been coached through it by Jim's team, and let's see how this works. Okay, here we go. Let's see if I can do this as a slideshow from the beginning. Look at this. I'm very proud of myself. The technology is not my strong suit, so bear with me. Make it move. All right, great. I did something that made it move. So first, thank you again for inviting me here to speak with you. You guys are already doing terrific work, and I've been a fan of your organization, of Jim and his team. I think they think big, and they want to create great outcomes, not just around the real estate, but you want to use the real estate as a tool to help people reach their full potential. So Purpose-Built Communities is a nonprofit, pro bono consultant, basically. We help local leaders revitalize neighborhoods so that they become great platforms for children and family with a goal of improving racial equity, economic mobility, and health outcomes. We have a very specific way of approaching this work, but those are the big things that we want to move the needle on: racial equity, economic mobility, and improved health outcomes for everyone. So we all know, and I know that you know this, but I wanted to ground us in this idea that poverty and place are tied together in America. You know, we're almost 60 years after Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty, and while we've won some of the battles, we haven't won the war. Over 40 million Americans continue to live below the federal poverty limit. And these are, by the way, pre-COVID numbers. So we know things have only gotten worse in the last couple of months. We know that poverty impacts children more acutely than it impacts adults. And 50% of children who are low income live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. And the research and data tells us that if you live in a neighborhood of concentrated poverty, your road to hoe is simply harder than if you happen to be a low-income family, a low-income child who lives in an economically integrated neighborhood. You can pull out any number of different statistics that will back this up. This one blows me away. I've said this 1,000 times over the last few years, but 86% of third graders who live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty cannot read at grade level. 86%, that's 6 out of 7. Now, this is the most important early metric to know whether your a child, a family, a community is on track for good educational outcomes, which lead to good economic outcomes, which lead to good health outcomes. So all these things are tied together, and your canary in the coal mine is third grade reading rates. Now, we have to acknowledge that there is a racial component here. 30% of Black kids live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty. Only 1% of white kids do. So we know that the racial, health, and economic inequities are tied to place and the policies and practices that created them. Now, this did not happen by accident. I hope you've had a chance, or some of you at least have had the chance to read Richard Rothstein's book, The Color of Law. In fact, I was on the phone with Richard talking about mixed income housing yesterday. But what Richard Rothstein did is he looked to see what were the government actions that were taken at the federal, state, and local level, really since about 1900, that made life harder for Black people and brown people and benefited white people. And so you can go right down the list, from redlining to segregated policies around housing authorities, FHA guarantees and who is eligible for them, promotion of restrictive covenants. You can look at all of these things. And what you'll see is you will recognize not just Nashville, but everywhere in this country, from Portland to Miami and New York to San Diego. This happened everywhere. It didn't happen by accident. But if these conditions were created by people, we have the ability to unwind those conditions and create more equity and more opportunity by being smart and being thoughtful about how we invest and how we create opportunities for people who were marginalized as a result of these actions. One of the things that's been most exciting to me over the last decade or so is a realization by experts, everybody from economists like Raj Chetty to educators like Robert Sampson to sociologists like Patrick Sharkey and kind of popular writers like David Brooks, that the neighborhood is really important in predicting children's outcomes. Neighborhoods are the most important predictor of whether a child is likely to be successful in the long term. And if you're thinking about creating platforms, neighborhoods are platforms that push kids and families forward, taking a neighborhood approach is important. And that's really different than the way services and resources have historically been delivered by our cities and governments and municipal agencies. Typically, they've been delivered in a siloed way. And so you've got your educators who are thinking over here, and you've got your parks and rec people, and you've got public safety, and you've got housing over here. And each of those silos might be able to look and say, yeah, I'm meeting the goals of my silos. But then you go out to talk to people who are living in neighborhoods, and they say, but my neighborhood doesn't work for me. And I would argue if neighborhoods are not working for the people who live there, the city is not working for the people who live there. So taking this cross-sectoral look, this horizontal section across those silos, that's what a neighborhood is. And so what we're trying to do is help folks like you think about how we create neighborhoods that are springboards, that will help everybody reach their full potential, rather than trying to deliver services that are in fact Band-Aids, that will never in and of themselves change outcomes at scale, or frankly, make the list easier down the road. I want to tell you the story about Eastlake, and I want to share with you, Eastlake, this revitalization happened 25 years ago. So now the Villages of Eastlake has been in place just as long as Eastlake Meadows was, which is really, we still call the Villages of Eastlake new, but it's not quite new. I want to point out that we've learned a lot over 25 years, and what we've done precisely in Eastlake, we're smarter now. We've learned from great folks like you guys and other practitioners around the country about great strategies. But I will tell you the Eastlake story. So back in 1995, both concentrated poverty and segregation in Eastlake Meadows produced really poor life outcomes for residents. It didn't really matter which statistic that you looked at. You could see that life was really hard if you lived in Eastlake Meadows. Very few kids were graduating from high school. It was one of the lowest performing schools in the city of Atlanta and in the state of Georgia. Incomes were at $4,500 for a family. The employment rate, not the unemployment rate, was 13%. 40% of the apartments were uninhabitable. And Andy Young, former mayor of Atlanta and former UN ambassador and congressman, used to say that the only time the haves and the have-nots came together in Eastlake was over the $35 million a year drug trade in that neighborhood. So whatever metric you looked at, it suggested that life was really hard if you lived in Eastlake. But what Eastlake had were some amazing people, some incredibly resilient people who, under the leadership of the resident president, Eva Davis, had really kind of reached the point where they were, that famous line from the old movie Network, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Miss Davis wanted something better, but she didn't have the allies to be able to do this by herself. She needed partners. New leadership at the Atlanta Housing Authority and a new foundation that wanted to focus on helping the Eastlake residents achieve their life dreams came together and planned together over about a 4-year period. And then we collectively executed that plan. Now, I make that sound like it was really easy and we were all holding hands and singing Kumbaya the whole time, but it was really hard and really difficult. And most of that time was about building trust and building relationships. After about 2 years of planning work, meeting weekly, the residents voted in favor of moving forward with this project, which had really never been done before. The idea of knocking down distressed public housing and then rebuilding in a mixed income manner. People were just starting to talk about it. The first projects of Hope 6 were just getting underway. So this hadn't been done before. So it took, it took a lot of bravery, it took a lot of trust, and it took a lot of confidence for the residents to say, we're in and we want to do something different. Well, here's what we all ultimately did together. We created a master plan for this neighborhood that included creating what are now 652 beautiful mixed income apartments. That includes 110 that are just opening now, that are new, that we've just added 25 years in. We see that crime is down dramatically. Residents' incomes, the public housing supported residents who live in the villages of Eastlake, their incomes are 6 times higher than when we started 25 years ago. Kids are thriving. They attend a neighborhood serving school, a cradle through college education pipeline, as we call it. The blended graduation rate for our high school over the last 3 years is over 98%. The school, which serves about 2,000 kids from birth through 12th grade, pre-K through 12th grade. The elementary school is now in the top 3% of the state, and the high school is one of the highest performing schools in Atlanta as well. Kids are thriving, the parents are doing really well, and the neighborhood has become a community of choice. It's a place where people want to live. It's attracted additional investment into this neighborhood. Eastlake, the surrounding neighborhoods of Kirkwood and Eastlake, which was a single-family neighborhood, those neighborhoods were underpopulated, lots of vacancy, lots of distressed single-family housing. Those are now neighborhoods where people want to live. And the reason people want to live here is because of how the Eastlake Meadows campus was redeveloped in a way that serves as this great platform to support kids and families. Everybody, whether you make $20,000 a year or $200,000 a year, we all have the same dreams and aspirations for our children. And that's what unites both the folks in the mixed income housing, this rental housing, and in the surrounding neighborhood, is that we care about our children and we're working really hard together so that every child in the community has an opportunity for a great life. So I left the Housing Authority in 2001 and moved around the round table and became the head of this organization called the Eastlake Foundation, which was created by this rich white real estate developer, a guy named Tom Cousins, a wonderful human being who had been a philanthropist for a long time. He started his company in 1958, and by 1964 had created his first family foundation to support folks who he felt hadn't had a fair shake in America, as Tom might put it. Tom had learned about Eastlake Meadows and had driven out there and was really stunned by what he saw and the conditions in which kids and families lived and the limited opportunity they had. He kind of said to himself that had I been born there, I would have been one of those people who ended up in jail or dead, recognizing that there were very limited opportunities for people in Eastlake Meadows. So Tom's family foundation created this organization called the Eastlake Foundation, which was what we now call a community quarterback organization. The Eastlake Foundation was really a nonprofit with the idea of figuring out how do we help get all these partners around the table. We need great housing, but it's not just great housing. We need education, we need health, we need amenities. We want to bring the amenities, amenitizing, if that's a word. How do we bring the kinds of amenities to the neighborhood that will serve everyone, that will attract additional investment to this neighborhood that had been underinvested? So I left the Housing Authority in 2001 and became the head of the Eastlake Foundation. And my job became, how do we help all of these partners work together? How do we help the housers work with the educators? How do we make sure we've got adequate, high quality, neighborhood serving early learning in the community to prepare every little genius to be ready to be successful in kindergarten and beyond? How do we think about building social capital in the neighborhood? How do we make sure that the programs offered in this neighborhood are actually programs that deliver results rather than just create churn? So the Eastlake Foundation morphed, as I said, into what we call a community quarterback organization that is committed to supporting, nurturing, sustaining this cross-sectoral revitalization. We also were able to step back and look and say, we didn't do everything. We did 3 really key things in a defined neighborhood. We worked with a cross-sectoral group of partners to create great quality mixed income housing. We created a high quality neighborhood serving, those are really important words, neighborhood serving, cradle to college education pipeline. And we thought about community wellness. Now, I'm not conflating that anymore with access to health care. I'm thinking about programs and investments that create vibrancy in a community, that provide resources that everybody wants, grocery stores, branch banks, YMCAs, access to recreation, the kinds of things that once we've, you know, if you're lucky enough to be able to choose where you live, you think first, generally, about what are my housing options. Then you think about where are my kids going to go to school. And then you think about what else does this neighborhood have to offer? And that's really important. What else does this neighborhood have to offer? Because if you've only got good housing, people might come and stay for a year, and they're going to go, man, where do I do my grocery shopping? Where do I work out? Where do I meet people? Where do I connect? If you have a great school, people will stay there, but they'll look otherwise. They won't build that sense of social capital if all these three things aren't happening together. We also recognize that we couldn't boil the ocean. We had to think about this in a bite-sized way, a neighborhood. We couldn't try to do this at the same time all over Atlanta. We had to really think about doing this within a defined neighborhood. And in most of the places where we work now, those neighborhoods are typically defined by the neighborhood and sometimes by the city. Some cities like Atlanta have officially drawn lines about neighborhoods. And then if cities don't, we always ask, like, how do people think about a neighborhood? How do they define it as a neighborhood? So this is a really clear approach. That doesn't mean it's easy or that it's not disruptive, but it's a clear approach to building a neighborhood that will support people long term. So when people ask me, why does it work in Eastlake and why is it working in other places, I always come back to this idea of the community quarterback organization. These are almost always newly created nonprofits that are not in the service delivery business, but are in the coordinating, convening, excellence building, data gathering, nurturing, sometimes hit you upside the head business to help keep everybody on track and executing upon the vision that had been created by a public community planning process. It's why the villages of Eastlake and the Eastlake neighborhood 25 years later are adding 110 new apartments, 70 of which will be affordable, because there's somebody thinking today about what does this community need so it can continue to be a platform for lower income families to be able to work their way up and out of poverty. It is the organization that is thinking about how do we protect access to this highly desirable neighborhood. In the schools, what are the policies that need to be in place at both the school and the local and state level that make sure low-income kids continue to have first priority to resource these services and opportunities. So this community quarterback on the front end is thinking about how do we get everybody together, how do we plan, how do we make sure we've got best-in-class implementation partners who are doing what they do best. How do we coordinate it? How do we make sure everything's got adequate resources? And how do we measure success and then keep doing it over and over? You know, how do we create a sense of continuous learning so that we continue to get better and drive better outcomes for families and for children? So I want to talk just a little bit more about that community quarterback. These are always nonprofit organizations. And in the 28 purpose-built communities network members around the country, I think only 2 were existing organizations that are incubating a new nonprofit with an expectation that they would spin off this new nonprofit community quarterback within about an 18-month period. The idea is that this community quarterback needs to be focused exclusively on how this neighborhood is evolving, how the partners are working together with the community to drive better outcomes and opportunities, to think about what the gaps and gores are, that are here today that might need to be addressed over the next 5 and 10 years. It has the ability to convene partners, to bring new partners to the table that might be needed. Occasionally, it's used to help work poorly performing partners out, because sometimes there's folks who are more interested in churn than outcomes who are there, and we have to acknowledge that. Raises money to close capital and operating fund gaps. We can talk a little bit more about that, and ensures long-term collaboration. Now, one of the reasons that this model is attractive to cities and to housing authorities is, while they may be important partners in doing some of the work, like the housing authority is in Nashville around the housing development piece and convening partners, the housing authority's got other things it has to do too. It's got, Jim, I don't know how many other projects that you want to see do the same thing that you're doing at Casey. You can't continue to spend that same amount of time and that brain power and focus on one project for 25 years. You've got to turn your attention to the next project. This is really an exit strategy in some ways for both cities and housing authorities to get things going and know that their work is going to be valued and built upon by private sector partners and nonprofit partners who will help work together to create these kinds of outcomes that we know are possible. These organizations are small because they are not doing the work themselves, right? It's not a big bureaucracy. There's usually somewhere between 3 and 5 people who work for a community quarterback organization. Sometimes it may be a little higher, sometimes it may be a little less, depending on the arc of the lifespan of the community quarterback and what they're doing at that point. But remember, the housing implementation partner is delivering the housing and managing that housing. Education partners are delivering the education program. The community quarterback is thinking, well, how do we tie this all together? How do we tie a cradle through college education pipeline together? How do we create opportunities for high quality early learning that have a priority to feed up into your neighborhood serving school? So frankly, you capture that investment that you're making in little kids, so you see better outcomes for them in elementary, middle, and high school, right? So it's thinking big about the initiative, working with the partners to help them be better at what they do, thinking about resources and thinking about what the next needs are. So once the plan has been made, then that they are thinking about executing, nurturing, and sustaining the work with both equity and excellence. And I want to keep those 2 words in your minds, equity and excellence. Neither of these things happen by accident. They happen when somebody's getting up every day, thinking about it, working with partners, understanding the pain points that each of these businesses have. So understanding what are the pain points in managing mixed income housing, understanding the regulatory framework in which a school exists, and how then can you get housers and educators work together. If you understand their business well enough, you can help broker solutions that are win-wins for both of the partners. If you don't have somebody there who's doing that every day, it's not going to happen, even with really well-meaning partners. What will happen is organizational inertia will take over, and your YMCA, rather than doing doing things the way that they should be done in a particular community because of the richness of partners there, goes back to doing things how the Y ordinarily does it. Or the school goes back to doing how it ordinarily does it, because that's the inertia of the bureaucracy that they are a part of. And so the community quarterback is always asking the question, thinking about how do we make sure that all of our partners are working together in a way that makes sense for this community to drive outcomes in this neighborhood, rather than thinking about what's easy, frankly, for all of the implementation partners. These 4 folks are folks who lead the community quarterbacks in 4 cities in our network: Kia Baker, Ocello Meadows, Ann Whitaker, and Logan Herring in different cities. They are amazing leaders. Ocello and Kia grew up in the neighborhoods where they are working. Neither Ann nor Logan did, although they had lots of close ties to those neighborhoods. The staff is really important because the staff interacts with your partners and who's out on the ground. You're looking for kind of Jesus on a good day when you hire somebody to be the CEO of a community quarterback. You're looking for somebody who's a strategic thinker, who's able to work with funders and with a board, and at the same time can build authentic relationships in the community. Community quarterbacks as nonprofit organizations have to have a really great board. And so, you know, it's kind of nonprofit 101. You want board members who represent lots of different perspectives, have lots of relationships, who are willing to use all of their chips and their relationships to help advance this work in this community. I won't try to read all this to you. You can take a look at this later. I'll make sure you all have this deck so you can look at it as well at your convenience. So I just want to point out that, you know, this executive board, effective board leadership is absolutely critical to the success of a community quarterback. So one of the things, you need people who are willing to put the interests of the initiative and of the community quarterback first. That's really about, do they have the ability to recognize their fiduciary duties? One of our lessons learned is we've had a couple of these organizations that were formed by representatives of all of the different partners. So we had a YMCA who appointed 2 people to the board. We had a charter school who appointed 2 people to the board. We had a health and wellness partner who appointed 2 people to the board. And that frankly didn't work because each of them kept their hat on for their own organization rather than thinking about the initiative as a whole. So while you want to have ways for your implementation partners to provide feedback and input into the community quarterback board, I would argue that our most successful community quarterbacks include board members who are expert at all the kinds of things that you want to accomplish, but they are not tied directly to the organizations delivering those services. You want board members who have a deep and abiding commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including a commitment to continue to learn about that and to continue to challenge their own biases and the biases of their organizations. You're looking for people who are willing to use all of their chips for the benefit of this community. They have influence in the broader community. Sometimes different members have different constituencies. So you might have a couple of people on this board who are well regarded in the funding community. You might have somebody else who's well regarded by the public sector. You might have somebody else who's a rock star in the education world, somebody who's a rock star in getting things done in your city. All of those kinds of things are important in terms of putting together a great board. And as always, whenever you're starting one of these organizations, whoever is that first board member, whoever takes this on and says, I'm willing to serve as a founding board member and help recruit other board members is really important, because whoever makes those invitations, we're borrowing their credibility as we start to get this board up and running. So being able to borrow that credibility is important. And then, you know, while this is a long-term strategy, we can't expect every board member to stay involved for 20 years, but you are looking for people who will say, yeah, I'll stay on this board for maybe 2-3-year terms. You know what? I will make this my most important volunteer commitment for the next 6 years or the next 3 years. But you've got to get folks who are not looking for just short-term wins, because this is long-term intergenerational work, and it'll continue to get better and better if you keep with it. So I pulled an example of a community quarterback board of directors structure that I thought you might find interesting. This is actually being used in 2 of our communities that have both been successful Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant winners. And I think it resonates with lots of folks who come out of the public housing world where we've been invited to a community through a housing authority. So if you think about a board of directors, let's say somewhere between 7 and 12 people or so to start. If it's too big, it's unwieldy, it's too hard to manage, egos run amok. Think about like 7 to 12 people might be the right size. You have an executive committee that is helping to keep things going between board meetings. And then there are 2 other committees that are really internally focused, that are thinking about the operations of the organization. One of which would be a development committee, which is fundraising, and then another that is finance and audit. You would probably see these 3 committees in almost any nonprofit organized to be successful in the long term. But the externally focused committees are the places where the rubber meets the road. And because of the way Choice Neighborhoods is organized, we've broken them down into a people committee and a place committee. And so the people committee might include everything about the programs that are serving people in the community. It might include early learning. It might include how we're working with our schools, kind of where that rubber meets the road. The place committee might be thinking about real estate and real estate investments, and are we attracting businesses and homeowners to the neighborhood? Those kinds of big picture things around place. But together, they have a good sense of all of these things. Almost all of our network members have some sort of advisory committee that is structured, that provides a way for implementation partners to be providing feedback to this community quarterback board of directors. I should also say this is not about ceding control of what you do. What this is about saying my organization will be more successful in the outcomes we want to achieve by working in a clear collaboration with other partners who share the same mission about creating great outcomes, creating healthy neighborhoods, and creating opportunities that, as I said, move the needle on racial equity, economic mobility, and better health outcomes. So we're doing this and have helped create community quarterbacks and over 25 network members around the country. These blue dots represent places where we have network members, and the red dots, including Nashville, are places where we've been dancing for a little while to figure out if what we know how to do helps you achieve the goals that you want to achieve. We don't have a list on a wall of where we want to be. We go where we're invited. And we've been enjoying and this relationship that's been developing between your organization and Purpose Built over the last couple of years. I really want to come back to this idea. Advancing racial equity is central to everything that we do. Now, we didn't used to call this out in the same way, and it may make some people uncomfortable, but we feel like we've got to call this out. And we've got to understand this. As I said earlier, concentrated poverty and segregation did not happen by accident. They happened as a result of policies and practices. And while none of us in this room, on this call, were responsible for putting those policies and practices in place, we all have an obligation to be unwinding the detrimental effect of those malintended public policies and actions. So we work very hard at this. We're working with a group called Race Forward. We've created 2 cohorts now of what we call equity ambassadors, which are network member executive directors and CEOs who have been through this 2-year-long process to develop a real expertise and comfort on talking about issues associated with racial equity, not just talking about them, but then using a racial equity lens to drive your decision making. We've recently been funded by Truist Foundation, the new merged bank by SunTrust and BB&T, to expand that work. And we're really excited about it. There's a real hunger for this by people. People want to understand and they want to have the tools to make a difference on racial equity. So we also have to be mindful about concerns about gentrification. Gentrification, you guys have experienced this. You have such a hot, or have had such a hot real estate market in Nashville that you feel the pressure that rents are going up, property values are going up, and that's real. Most of the places where we work, frankly, it is the fear of gentrification that is more of an issue than actual pressures, market pressures. In Nashville, we have to recognize that this is really true and that we have to be planning for this. Planning for deep, permanent affordability is an important way of addressing gentrification concerns, but it's not the only thing that we have to do. We have to be thinking about neighborhood serving businesses. So much of the culture of a neighborhood is in the businesses that have been there for a long time. So even though there are fewer tools available to support neighborhood serving businesses that are part of the fabric of a community, that's an important thing for us to be thinking about. Are there ways and strategies to make sure that those businesses can stay in place? How do we help facilitate the development of social capital as a neighborhood becomes more racially and economically diverse? Doesn't happen by accident. Like I said, people don't just show up and everybody hold hands and sing Kumbaya. I will tell you, in my experience, the single most important tool for building social capital in an economically and racially diverse neighborhood is a high quality neighborhood serving elementary school that serves everybody, that is so good it helps kids who have been left behind, whose families have been left behind, that helps them reach their full potential and catch up and compete with anybody. And at the same time, it's so good that it attracts people with choice to the neighborhood. That's, in my mind, what sustains this revitalization, both the real estate revitalization as well as the human capital piece. High quality neighborhood serving school. Suburban districts know this all day long. Good schools drive economic development. Cities, for some reason, have been less willing to think about that. But we know that if we're thinking about creating an equitable neighborhood that creates excellent outcomes for the lowest income families, we've got to have great neighborhood serving schools. So this is my favorite quote of all time. The status quo is both stupid and expensive. What we are doing as a country right now doesn't make sense and costs a lot of money. So we've got to be disruptive. We've got to be thinking about doing things differently than what we've done historically. We've got to be thinking about not just the income gap, but the wealth gap. What are we doing to close that gap? How are we using housing strategies as ways to close that gap? We know that displacement is complicated. You know, most of the places where we're invited to work, before we get there, there's a neighborhood transiency rate of 30 to 40% because people are moving all the time. Some of that is moving because they've been evicted or prices are going up. Some of it's because people have got a little bit more change in their pocket and want to move to a better place. Or sometimes it's, but fundamentally to me, it's the place can't compete for people. How do we think about competing for people so they want to stay because it's a great place to be, not because they're afraid it's the only place to be? So that really takes a change of your mindset and think about what we're delivering here is a neighborhood that can compete, where transiency will be reduced because people want to stay and we've built sufficient permanent affordability in there that people can stay. I also want to point out transiency is the enemy of academic achievement. In most low-performing schools, there's a transiency problem. You might see 40, 50, 60% of kids cycle in and out during the school year. If you're a teacher, no matter how good you are, you're never going to get to where you know you could be if you had the same kids in your class all year long. Housing transiency generates educational transiency. So these things are connected, and understanding that, and that's why, you know, this idea of how do you help everybody understand one another's pain points and why it's important to be thinking about these things together is how you drive outcomes. I've been talking for way too long. I would love to entertain any questions that you might have. And let me see if I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen so we can look at each other and actually talk. Anybody guide me on how to stop doing that?
So Carol, in the top right of your PowerPoint, there's a green and red button. One says stop, one says share. I think if you hit the stop button, it'll release it.
Okay, hold on. Let me see. It's in, where am I seeing this?
In the upper right.
Yep. Is it under the share or under more?
If you've got a PowerPoint, it's in the upper right. There's a green and red button, stop and share.
Okay, stop sharing, got it. Mine's a different color, that's what threw me.
Sorry.
That's all right, you've got me where we need to be, thank you. So I just gave you guys a ton of information. People say getting a briefing from me is like taking a sip of water from a fire hydrant, but I'd love to just open up the conversation. Any question is fair game. So I'm happy to talk about anything that you would like with regard to what we've done or what you're doing and anything in between.
That's great. I have a feeling that we have lots of questions. And so maybe we can just go around by commissioner and get some of those answered. So Kay, I saw that you raised your hand eagerly if you'd like to kick us off. You're on mute, Kay.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You can hear me? So thank you, Carol. This is very informative, and I have studied Eastlake and its model for quite a while. It's amazing. And it's amazing what can be accomplished when you think long-term as opposed to short-term. But one question, quick question, has to do with permanent affordability when it comes to the home ownership side of things in communities and neighborhoods like Eastlake. What was the model that you all used for home ownership, affordable home ownership?
Great question, and the short answer is in Eastlake we did not include any home ownership, and that was because Ms. Davis didn't want any home ownership. But lots of our network members around the country are doing affordable home ownership as part of their work. So as I started off to say, Eastlake's 25 years old. It was one project. We've learned lots from other people. So in terms of affordable home ownership, the model that's getting the most traction these days, there's two models, but we're really excited about using community land trust as a tool for affordable home ownership. In fact, the guy who runs Grounded Solutions used to work for me in Atlanta. And so we've been
Carol, that's my organization.
I love you guys. I love you guys. Tony and I were neighbors and we worked together for years. So I think the Community Land Trust is a great model for affordable home ownership, and it allows you to tweak what you want in different ways to balance the tension between permanent affordability and wealth building. And the flexibility there is really exciting. In other places around the country, in markets that are not as hot, it's just not been as big an issue. So in Birmingham, for example, they've been putting in soft second mortgages that will burn off over 15 years. And again, because people aren't worried about the Birmingham housing market going through the roof, they haven't felt the need to move to the Community Land Trust model. But frankly, in a place like Nashville, I think that's a great tool. There are probably others, but that's where I would start.
Thank you.
By the way, even 25 years later, in this Eastlake and Kirkwood neighborhoods, still about 30% of the people who live there are low income. So even though the housing prices have gone up a lot, about 30% continue to be owned by low income folks who are now seniors. And so they have something to leave to their family, where their house used to be worth $45,000, now it's worth $300,000. And that's going to create intergenerational wealth. That is something that is meaningful. And while that wasn't our explicit goal, we're happy about that.
Thank you.
Paulette, did you have a question? You're on mute. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Carol. And what you talked about kind of represents what I think is important in a lot of the work in which I've been involved in. It's all brought together. The issues that you raised with regard to the importance of building a school, and a school that educates everybody in the community. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that and how you monitored and shaped the school so that it was about excellence and equity?
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to talk about that. I'll talk first about Eastlake and then maybe give an example or two from around the country. From the very beginning of the planning process in Eastlake, with Eastlake Meadows, with residents and all the partners, the housing authority, we knew that this community desperately needed a high quality neighborhood serving school. And the first strategy was to work with Atlanta Public Schools to do something really different in Eastlake than had been done before. We worked with Atlanta Public Schools to create a model that was going to be kind of a laboratory school with Georgia State University's College of Education. And the Eastlake Foundation said, we'll go out and raise money to build this school building so the city wouldn't have, the school system wouldn't have to do that. But honestly, we wanted a vote in who the new head of school would be, who the principal would be. And at that point, Atlanta Public Schools said, well, we don't care that you're going to raise $20 million to build a new school. We're not going to give you a voice in the principal selection process. And that was a non-starter, right? We couldn't go to the foundation community and try to raise money if we didn't have a voice in who the school leader would be. Not a veto, just a voice, right? Because we all know, speed of the captain, speed of the crew. You will not have a great school unless you have a great principal. So we spent about 4 years trying to find a solution. And we were beating our head against the wall, frankly. The Atlanta Board of Education was in turmoil. It was back in the day where the board used to get in fist fights during their meeting. It was a bad time in the early and mid 90s in Atlanta Public Schools. And so we didn't know what we were going to do. And in fact, bought some land maybe a mile away from the campus, thinking we might have to do a private school, but we couldn't find a financing model that would allow us to serve the kids we wanted to serve at the level they needed to be served, and that made sense. So that was an economic non-starter. So lo and behold, the Georgia legislature passes the charter school legislation. And we look at each other and we say, let's do a charter school. What's a charter school? In that order. And we saw that is really our only pathway into creating a new public school that would serve the kids in this neighborhood. And as we learned about the charter model, we recognized that because charters operate with their own boards of directors, that if we had a board of directors who is aligned with the mission that we wanted to achieve around neighborhood serving schools, growing to excellence, not being complacent when the school gets a little bit better, that we could really create something great together. So that school opened in 2000 with about 250 kids in a temporary building. That year was the lowest performing school in the city of Atlanta. And honestly, we were devastated because we were so arrogant, man. We were so arrogant. We thought, man, just give us a year. We'll get everybody whipped into shape. We didn't appreciate how hard it is to catch kids up who may be 3, 4, 5 years behind, and that you don't do that overnight, that you need a long-term game plan. And so every year, our school grew. We moved into the permanent facility a year later and doubled the size of the school. And the school has continued to grow from that original 250 to now about 2,000 kids from pre-K through 12th grade. And every year, the Eastlake Foundation has supported that board in a couple of different ways. I joined the board when I became the head of the Eastlake Foundation. I continue to serve on that board. I need to get off that board, frankly. I've been on it for way too long, but I love it, and it's important, and I learned so much as a result of being on that board. Nevertheless, but it was the charter school model influenced by the Eastlake Foundation, which owned the land on which the school was built, right? And so leased the building to the school that operates under its own name, Charles R. Drew Charter School, Inc. And so having that land, owning the land and building into the lease expectations around excellence gave the foundation some leverage to continue to be able to talk about moving better. after about 5 years, our school was what I would call a B school. We were doing okay compared to other Atlanta schools, particularly other Atlanta schools that were serving lots of low-income kids. What gets me excited at that point, there were some people who said, that's good. That's all we should aspire to. And the Eastlake Foundation, the Drew Board of Directors, and parents said, hell no, pardon my language, our kids are capable of being in an A school and doing A work, and we need to keep pushing. And so we thought, well, okay, maybe that means a new school leader, right? Somebody who knows what excellence looks like and knows how to get us from being an A school to a B school. And so we just kept moving. So again, long-term vision, having the flexibility as a board to be able to both raise a little bit of extra money, but it's actually very little extra money, to be able to think about how the Eastlake Foundation's role was making sure there was adequate early learning in the community. One of the most important levers of academic excellence is high quality early learning. So that was something that Drew Charter School didn't have to do itself, but the Eastlake Foundation worked with partners to bring 2 high quality early learning centers to the community, and worked with those partners to make sure that their policies and practices served neighborhood kids first. And then we went to the state legislature and got the state law changed to allow kids who came out of those early learning programs to have a priority to go into the charter school, to really create a pipeline. So I would say none of those things would have been possible without a community quarterback. Because none of the schools would have had the bandwidth to do it themselves, not the charter school, not the early learning partners by themselves, but it was this community quarterback that was thinking about how do we be the glue and the grease between all these partners. And that's the kind of thing that a community quarterback is thinking about that allows better outcomes to happen. So that was a long-winded answer, but I hope it helps.
That's great. Thank you.
Commissioner Batts, do you have any questions?
I do. I was listening as she was speaking about the elders leaving the place to their family, or did I not hear that right? Are they purchasing those or just leasing them?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Thank you very much. But what I was referring to is for people in the neighborhood, the larger neighborhood surrounding the Villages of Eastlake campus, those are all single-family homes. And those single-family homes, about 1/3 of them continue to be owned by low-income seniors. And so those are the people who have the asset to leave behind. The Villages of Eastlake is all rental. And while that was because that's what the residents wanted. And while lots of the communities we support include more mixture of tenure, include both single family and condos and townhouses that can be owned by people across a broad range of incomes, that wasn't possible 25 years ago in Eastlake.
Oh, okay. So, well, about a waiting list, like if other people needed it, do y'all have that? Is that?
So in the rental housing,
Okay.
there is a waiting list, and it's the same kind of waiting list that the housing authority has to use. And we have priorities. So one of the interesting and I think creative priorities that have been put into place are to serve families with children under the age of 10. They move to the top of the waiting list because we want to get kids with families into the community sooner rather than later. If I can get kids into the community when they're little itty bitties, that's better than getting them in as teenagers, right? Because you have a longer pathway to work with them. So we put that in place. It doesn't mean families with teenagers don't move in, but a family with at least one child under the age of 10 moves up in priority.
Thank you. Right.
You're welcome. This is a lot. I know I'm just sending a lot of information out there, so I'm happy to answer questions now and in the future.
Thank you.
Commissioner Campbell, do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay, thank you. And Commissioner Purcell?
Thank you. I want to, I think especially for me, but for all of us on the board. Thank Carol Norton for coming today and bringing her fire hose. No reason to apologize about that. This is a board that I think heard and appreciated everything that you said, and most importantly, knew a lot about you and what you would say, and look forward to it. And I especially did, because unknown, I think, to most of the board members, we haven't had a chance to talk about it. Several weeks ago, the Community Advisory Group here at Casey asked to speak to the new board chair. I'm now just not very many months into being the chair of the board, and they thought it was time to bring the new chair along. So Carol Williams and Randall Gilbert and Bob Borzak summoned the chair to a meeting here at MDHA, and they said many things, and we went over the history here as we should have. But at the end, they asked me to do one thing. They asked me to go to East Lake, much like Dwight Eisenhower going to Korea now, half a century ago. They said, you should go to East Lake. And I said, I will. And after hearing you, I'm even more convinced than I was then that was exactly the right advice, and that was the right answer. So I'm telling you that I've made that commitment and hoping that you will welcome me. I know travel for us all is a little more complicated now, but it's not that much of a road trip. And I think, and for other members of the board that might like to go as well, either then or at some other time, I think we should go and we should see. But you've done an extraordinary job today of I think, again, inspiring us, as you obviously have others before. And I'm looking forward to that inspiration. And I would also add that your conversation about the board and the importance of the board had relevance for our board and for every board. You did a great job at a high level and at a very local level, making clear the critical importance of board and board commitment. And let me say to the board members, as I heard you speaking and as I looked at your work chart, I think this is a board, a high-performing board, and the kind of board that has that larger commitment and will know what needs to be done when we're building that board here to be a purpose-built community, if that's where we end up. And obviously, I think you have a lot of fellow travelers here. So thank you very, very much, and thanks to Jim for moving so quickly to at least bring you virtually here, knowing that I couldn't get to East Lake or Korea right away, but soon, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mayor, I think you may know Shirley Franklin is our executive board chair. And so having the perspective of a former mayor in this work is really valuable. And in fact, there are a couple of former mayors, Bill Barnett in Spartanburg, who's one of my favorite people on the planet, is the chair of the community quarterback organization in Spartanburg. He's, again, a prince among men, and has been leading this work for about 7 years now, and they're just doing great things. So I mean, I think that this is hard, complex, fraught work. I don't want to say it's easy. It's not. You'll make people mad because this is doing things differently, and doing things differently can be frightening, and it can be disorienting. So it's just a hard process. I don't want to suggest that it's easy, but I'm delighted. You are all welcome to come to East Lake when you can travel safely. Again, I'd love to show you around, love to show you our school. We use the reality as a proxy measure academic achievement and other ways that kids are thriving as really a proxy measure for how well the community is doing, because kids in schools don't outperform their neighborhood, so it gives us a window and a visibility into this work.
Well, thank you. I'll look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Thank you.
Carol, I have a question for you. So I have two questions. The first one is, how did you address, when you're bringing in middle income households to the neighborhood, the implicit racism and white privilege that can come with that, And how are you making sure to protect and make sure that social capital is built in an equitable and racially equitable way?
Yeah, so great questions. And I would say 25 years ago, we didn't do that. We didn't understand equity. It was, I think maybe only Angela Glover Blackwell out on the West Coast was talking about equity 25 years ago. She's really kind of the mother of the movement. So I can say we didn't, and I wish we had. We just didn't know. We didn't know about it. What served in its place was simply relationships, and the relationship that I had with Eva Davis, and other relationships that I had with other people in the community, particularly the families who had lived in East Lake Meadows before. Those relationships helped and created a little bit of insight into some of the struggles that folks on that side of the income line were struggling. I remember talking to a real good friend of mine named Lucia, who saw a resident drive into the community driving what was probably a 6-year-old new car. And Lucia said something, look at her showing off in her new car. And I looked at her and said, Lucia, and I've known Lucia for like 7 years, so I could say something to her. I said, Lucia, do you know this person? No. Well, I said, why are you assuming that she's showing off in her new car? What do you, so I could challenge a little bit of Lucia's bias, the same way then I could challenge the bias of people coming in on the higher income side who might have had some biases. There were a number of young people in seminary who chose to move to the Villages of Eastlake when it first opened. Some of them were great and some of them were awful. And just because you were going to seminary didn't mean that you had thought about your own implicit bias, right? And so there were lots of challenges. So I can say we didn't do a good job on that at all. We didn't know about it. Now, as we try to support communities, people are really very thoughtful about creating mechanisms for people to come together. Again, the school is the best place, and building that equity lens in everything that happens out of the school is a really important tool of building social capital. And that has worked better than any other strategy that I have seen. And one thing, I love our team in Birmingham. They do community dinners like 4 times a year, and they close down the streets and they put big tables down the middle of the roads, and everybody comes to the Sunday dinner 4 times a year. And so there are, people are doing activities like that to create opportunities for people to get to know one another. Those are helpful, but again, you got to be proximate. Brian Stevenson, who wrote Just Mercy, one of my favorite books of 2014, talks about if you're a social justice warrior, the first thing you have to be is proximate to the people you care about, right? And so if we can start somewhere, I'd say start with proximity. Start getting people in the same place and creating opportunities for them to rub up against each other and start to get to know each other, and then figure out what works and keep iterating. Because in your community, it might be a little bit different than in Birmingham or than in Spartanburg or in Washington or Chicago. So again, that's part of what the community quarterback is doing. I'll share with you, we've started a community of practice amongst our community quarterback CEOs and executive directors. And this is one of the topics that they're really digging down on together to lift up what has worked and identify what hasn't worked in terms of building social capital, because we think that's a really important part of this work. So again, a little bit of a long answer, but I hope I answered your question.
No, I really appreciate it. And I'd love to just learn more about, what they're coming up with and lessons learned, because I think it's so relevant. My next question for you is, so obviously a lot of communities haven't necessarily found their Tom Cousins or does not have one. And so how are you seeing other communities address the fundraising needs that are necessary to cultivate and develop a community quarterback, and most importantly, sustain them over time?
Yeah, great question. So there's no doubt that the community quarterbacks in our network who are well-resourced move the fastest and have the easiest time. So, you know, it doesn't mean you can't do it without a Tom Cousins. You might have, like in New Orleans, there's maybe 5 people together who fill that role, but it's not easy, right? Having somebody who is wealthy, a family foundation or a community foundation or another organization that is willing to say, I'm going to fund this community quarterback for, let's say, 5 years. There may be some local funding available through a bank. I'm going to say down the road, you might find Truist, for example, that has just identified us as one of their 2 national partners. You might find the local Truist leadership willing to finance a community quarterback for 5 years. They're going to do that in another city. They're interested in doing that in other places in their network. I'm probably talking out of school right now, but my point is that if it's not Truist, there may be somebody else. Hospital systems are great partners now who are stepping up. Healthcare conversion foundations. This is one of the most fascinating things about this work lately is the recognition that this work moves the needle on health outcomes. And so what we're finding is hospital systems, health conversion foundations are interested in investing in this model in the community quarterback specifically. In Florida, Omaha, Raleigh, Houston, just off the top of my head, health foundations are making major investments in that, what I call the infrastructure of excellence and equity, the community quarterback. So there are, if it's not just a rich old white guy like Tom, there are other ways to get there. And we would work with you to help maybe understand what the spectrum of opportunities, spectrum of solutions might be there in a place like Nashville.
Thank you. And Aoli, I know that you had to step off briefly, but you're back, and I want to make sure that you have a chance to ask any questions.
No, I don't actually have any questions, Carol, but thank you very much for a great presentation. I actually grew up in East Atlanta. I grew up right at the intersection of Flat Shoals and Brandon Road. So if you know where they come together, where the little gas station sits on the corner, where for many years. And so I graduated from high school in '89. So it was right before the work really got started over at East Lake Meadow. So I've been a part of the, I've seen it from afar. My brother and I, we play golf over at the little short par 3 course, and we've a couple times you've seen the revitalization of the East Lake Country Club and everything in that area. So other than just, it was good to hear all the details behind what happened, but I've had the opportunity to watch it happen over the last kind of sort of 20-25 years, and it's been fantastic.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned golf. I often don't talk about golf. The East Lake Golf Club and the Charlie Yates Golf Course are both part of the project, and the East Lake Golf Club has helped raise money to support this effort. But what I really want to share with you is that the Drew Charter School boys golf team won the state championship last May.
Fantastic.
The first time anywhere in the country, or the first time that an Atlanta public school has won the state championship in golf, and the first time anywhere in the country that an all-black team has won a state championship in golf. And to me, that's evidence that, you never know what it is that's going to catch a kid's interest. And what it is, and exposing kids to lots of different kinds of things can create great pathways for them. So all those, well, the seniors now are off in college, 2 of them on golf scholarships.
I mean, I think one of the other things you talk about, working class and market rate folks over there. I think, adding a grocery store across the street, right? That adding a grocer was a really big win. But I also think really getting that golf course in, I don't know how you ended up getting that financed inside that project. I think it actually set a tone of aspiration inside the community even before, I think that it did that without, it wasn't, the rents or the elevations or that. I think it set the right aspirational tone over there. And quite frankly, it took kids that can't, that left when East Lake Meadows was torn down and eventually came back, right? It gave them something different to do. And they started interacting with different people on the golf course than they would have interacted otherwise.
Amen. And, you know, I remember taking 2 young men who were probably 10 and 12. This would have been back in 2001, taking them to participate in a summer golf tournament. And so I drove them and we got there and Willie looked at me and he said, Miss Carroll, I'm going to win this game for you, win this tournament for you. And I thought, oh man, that's putting a lot of pressure on you. So he gets up on the first tee and he shanks the ball way into the woods. And I thought, oh, it's all over. But what I love, what I take away from that is watching Willie walk over to the woods, pull himself together, and hit a great second shot. And to me, that's life, right? We all hit those terrible shots off the tee. The question is, how do we pull ourselves together and be able to get back in the game? And that's one of the things that golf teaches. There's lots of ways to teach that. But those are the kinds of life lessons that kids learn playing golf, and they've taught me watching them play. How do I get my act together and do better the second time?
So thank you again. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, Carol, thank you so much for your time today. If you wouldn't mind just making sure that we could get a copy of your slides, and if folks have any additional questions, I really appreciate you offering for us to be able to reach out to you.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. And again, let me thank you all for your service. I know this is hard service. It takes a lot of time. It's complicated, but I'm so grateful to people like yourselves stepping up to serve on the board of a public housing agency. Thank you for that. And I look forward to continuing our conversations. And so Jim and everybody, Emily, everybody, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right.
And so, how to leave the meeting.
Okay.
Carol.
And so that was such an easy presentation to just be so inspired by. And, you know, I'm sorry to do this, but I'm going to move us back over to talking about litigation for our final 13 minutes, just to make sure we can get through our agenda at the next meeting.
I now have the unenviable task of following Carol Naughton's excellent presentation. The least I can do is have the slideshow work better. Buck Dellinger, I'm leaning on you because we worked on this yesterday. So I'm going to share, and it's going to be screen 2. I'm told I'm sharing this screen. I hope that's correct. So if everything's worked wonderfully, there's a slide that has Leggett versus MDHA at the top.
We can see it, and it looks great.
Oh, so good. Okay. Leggett versus MDHA is in Davidson County Circuit Courts, case number 18C2176. This one was filed August of 2018. This matter involves a claim that a handrail in the plaintiff's apartment at CB Waller came loose. As a result, the plaintiff unfortunately fell. The plaintiff, who's now deceased, sought personal injury damages, and her son was also a co-plaintiff in the matter, seeking damages for an old common law remedy called loss of consortium, which can best be explained as loss of the benefits that one experiences that are attributable to the positive relationship that a mother and son have. And this loss of consortium, it arose from the mother's injury. The damages claimed in this one are $10,000 according to the terms of complaint, $10,000 in medical bills. Our legal counsel, again provided by Tennessee Housing Authority Risk Management Trust, is David Brogdon, an attorney who specializes in personal injury and insurance defense. And he has his own law firm, Brogdon Law, in Dixon, Tennessee. The opposing counsel representing, representing the estate and her son is Daniel Marshall out of Nashville, Tennessee. The case status here, our attorney actually filed what's called a motion for summary judgments, which upon review and investigation of all the facts that have arisen or been disclosed through, interviews, depositions, exchange of documents. In light of those facts and existing law, the argument being MDHA is not liable for the injuries alleged. This motion was granted, which would close the case in MDHA's favor ordinarily. The opposing counsel filed a motion to set aside this judgment shortly after, on the basis that he wasn't aware that he wasn't aware that a motion had been filed, that there was a hearing. So the case is not closed. This hearing on the motion to set aside would have been heard in the past month or two, but again, with the court closures due to COVID-19, this one unfortunately remains pending for now. But the last major development in this case was favorable to MDHA, and those are all the updates I have on this matter. Legs versus MDHA also is a personal injury matter. It's in Davidson County Circuit Court, filed in December 2018, case number 18C3124. The facts here, according to the complaint, was a fall suffered by the plaintiff, which occurred on a landing and a ramp constructed of wood, and is alleged that didn't have handrails as required by applicable codes. Again, we have Mr. Brogdon representing MDHA, provided by Housing Authority Risk Management Trust. The opposing counsel, also in Nashville, Andrea Pierpoint with Queener Law. The damages that were claimed were $160,000 in medical charges. Again, I said that they were because this matter has settled. It went to mediation, and it was settled for just under the prayed for amounts, and the settlement proceeds were paid by the Risk Management Trust. So the only thing that we don't have is a final order from the judge dismissing the case, but it went to mediation. Mediation was successful and concluded. We just were waiting for that final order.
Is that person still a tenant?
So I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
And what did you say the settlement was? I didn't quite hear what you said.
What was the question one more time?
In the legs thing, you said there had been a settlement.
It was settled for, the attorney told me it was settled for a number just below the amount prayed for, which was $160,000. Okay. And this was covered by insurance.
Okay.
Allen versus MDHA is from MDHA Housing in 2014 that has kind of traveled, so to speak. So this residence was issued a lease termination, and upon the expiration of the lease termination was issued and served with a detainer warrant, which sets a court date and a hearing before the judge to determine whether the lease has been terminated and whether, so sorry. Okay, whether the lease has been terminated and whether MDHA is entitled to a judgment for possession. The conclusion of this was a default judgment, so MDHA was granted possession. When you're in General Sessions Court, which is where all our detainer warrants, our eviction matters are heard, a party has 10 days to appeal that. The party here, the plaintiff, filed an appeal, but it was untimely. It was in 15 days. And so rather than dismissing it outright, the court dismissed it under rule of procedure 41, which is failure to prosecute. And so This matter ended up being appealed again from state court to the Tennessee Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals looked at the procedural history and said, well, while it was untimely, and while the it was wasteful of the court's time, this probably wasn't worthy of a dismissal under Rule 41, because usually those failure to prosecute, you've got a matter pending for a year, whereas here it was just a few weeks. So the Court of Appeals ruled in the plaintiff's favor, not in MDHA's favor. So it went back down to the circuit courts. MDHA filed an appropriate motion to dismiss on the basis that the appeal was untimely, and this was granted. Now, going back to the Court of Appeals, there was a dissenting opinion, and I guess the concern was whether the plaintiff would have his day in court. And so the dissent felt that MDHA should be entitled to win, and dropped in the dissenting opinion, there was a note that should the appeal be denied, the plaintiff, Mr. Allen, would still have an avenue to proceed. He could file what's called a collateral attack. So Mr. Allen contends that he was never served in this matter with the detainer warrants. And so because of that, he can file what's called a collateral attack. That's what the dissenting opinion stated. And about a year later, after it was dismissed, a pro bono attorney on Mr. Allen's behalf filed this collateral attack. He took the dissenting opinion's advice and filed a collateral attack. The opposing counsel is a gentleman named Will York, who works at an immigration firm called Osment Law. He's taking the case pro bono. It's in Davidson County Circuit Court right now before Judge Brothers. It doesn't appear that there's any interest on Mr. Allen's side to litigate. They're really just looking for a return to housing, whether it's MDHA housing or some other housing. So there isn't any movement in the case right now. It's still pending. And there isn't really another update to give. The pro bono attorney has filed this collateral attack, I guess, to preserve that as a means of pursuing housing by reversing the eviction from 2014. But there's no fight on the other side that I can tell. So it's just a matter that's been pending for a while. And that's it with Allen versus MDHA. Doss versus MDHA. This was it's in federal district court in Nashville, case number 319 CV 121. It was filed February 2019. This is the former general counsel alleges discharge for reporting workplace harassment. This MDHA board was previously notified. A workplace investigation was immediately conducted. The investigation did not substantiate the allegations. Before it was filed in federal court, the plaintiff referred the matter to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, for investigation as well. They issued a no cause to believe that retaliation, harassment, or discrimination had taken place. So she filed her lawsuit in federal courts. The Housing Authority Risk Management Trust provided Manier and Herod, the same law firm that's representing us in the Hampton Vision Realty matter. The opposing counsel representing Ms. Doss is Brian Winfrey. He is of counsel with Morgan & Morgan. He's not part of the Morgan & Morgan firm, but he has some association with Morgan & Morgan, and he's an employment discrimination attorney. Per the complaint, the damages claimed were $500,000 in compensatory damages, back pay, and front pay. The facts have not been developed in this case. Documents have been exchanged. No depositions have taken place. There's not really been a lot of movement. The case was set for trial in October of 2020, but this also is unlikely due to COVID, and there are no further updates on this matter. I'm seeing the clock that it's 10:59, and I have three more matters to go through, so I'm looking for guidance on whether to proceed or postpone.
I think we will have to continue this at our next meeting.
Okay.
So, Jim, any final comments? Otherwise, I'm assuming that we should table the agenda for our next committee meeting.
That works, and we'll just pick up with the legal. Just on the agenda, the last three are pretty straightforward updates on ongoing development. The only one that really has a time that takes some time is the legal. We can do the ones that are the ones that take more time today. So the others are relatively straightforward. So we'll just pick up on Tuesday if that's acceptable to the board.
All right. With that, thank you so much, everyone, and we really appreciate you bringing Carol in for the presentation today. All right.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.